This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards in this video in their store by using the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neetsahone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today, we're going to take a look at Changeling. Changeling is a keyword ability introduced in Lorwyn. A card with Changeling possesses every creature type at all times. In other words, creatures or other cards with Changeling easily slot into any deck interested in a particular creature type, as they can benefit from any and all bonuses you get for playing creatures of a specific type. Since debuting in Lorwyn, we've also seen the mechanic return in both Modern Horizons and Kaldheim. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have Changeling. There were 51 cards eligible for the list, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's take a look at the top 10 cards with Changeling. At number 10, it's Tori and Mer. For 2 generic and a red, this is a 2/2 with Changeling, and whenever an opponent plays a spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter. While it certainly doesn't start out as a very efficient creature, it does grow throughout the game and really punishes opponents who cast several spells in a turn. While most of the cards on this list have gained at least some of their points in decks that care a little bit about creatures of a particular type, that's not true of Tori and Mer. It had top 8s in both Extended and Legacy between 2008 and 2009. In Extended, it was a sideboard card for aggro decks, and in Legacy it was one of the win conditions for Dragon Stompy. These are mono-red prison decks that look to lock the opponent out of casting spells, or at least punish them for doing it. The Mauler doesn't have any points though since 2009. At number 9, it's Realm Walker. For 2 generic and a green, it's a 2/3 Changeling, and when it enters the battlefield you choose a creature type, and you can cast spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. While most Changelings slot nicely into creature type decks, this one goes the extra mile by giving you a powerful additional payoff for playing creatures that have the same type, as casting cards from the top of your library gives you significant card advantage. Unsurprisingly, Realm Walker's points have all come in those exact kind of decks, including Pioneer Angels and Pioneer Modern and Legacy Elves. Realm Walker is likely to gain more points in the future. At number 8, it's Changeling Outcast. For 1 black mana, this Changeling is a 1/1 that can't block and can't be blocked. The Outcast is from Modern Horizons, so it has only ever been legal in Modern, Legacy, Vintage, and Pauper. Its points have all come in Legacy Ninja decks. Most ninjas have ninjutsu, which lets you pay an alternate cost to put a ninja into play tapped and attacking, provided that creature was already attacking and unblocked. Obviously, Changeling Outcast is amazing at setting this up, as it can come down on turn 1 and let you ninjutsu something like Ingenious Infiltrator on turn 2, and it also happens to have the ninja type, so it can draw you a card when you hit your opponent when you do have Ingenious Infiltrator in play. The Outcast is going to gain more points in Legacy going forward. At number 7, it's Mirror Entity. For 2 generic and a white, this Changeling is a 1/1, and you can pay X mana to make all of your creatures into XXs with all creature types until end of turn. Obviously, if you've got a developed board, this can make your opponent's life very difficult. It saw play in Kithkin and Merfolk decks in Block and Elf decks in Extended. It was one of the win conditions for Extended's Elf combo deck, which liked to cast Glimpse of Nature and play a bunch of cheap elves that can tap for mana right away. This ultimately resulted in you having a ton of elves in play and a bunch of mana, so the entity was great at making your board lethal, and when it couldn't give you lethal damage, it could still be tapped for mana, because it was an elf. The entity hasn't gained any points since 2009, but Changelings aren't evergreen or anything, so it may be on this list for a while. At number 6, it's Crib Swap. This Changeling isn't actually a creature. Instead, it has the very weird Tribal type, which has actually recently been changed to Kindred. Either way, the card type means that this card gets all the benefits of having a particular creature type, despite not being a creature, and because this one has Changeling, you benefit from all creature type payoffs. This strange card type didn't last for very long and isn't used anymore for the most part. Anyway, Crib Swap costs 2 generic and a white, and it exiles a creature, and that creature's controller gets a 1/1 with Changeling. It gained most of its points as a singleton card in Block and Extended Treefolk decks, though it was also played in Kithkin and Merfolk decks. Crib Swap was tutorable by Treefolk Harbinger, for example, and that's pretty great, because when Crib Swap is good, it tends to be really good, but it doesn't have any points since 2010. At number 5, it's Unsettled Mariner. For a white and a blue, this 2/2 Changeling forces your opponent to pay a tax of 1 mana to target your creatures, otherwise the spell gets countered. 1 mana might not sound like a lot, but in most games of Magic, making your opponent overpay for removal is great in terms of tempo, and it often gives your creatures one more turn on the battlefield than they would have had otherwise, and if you're playing an aggro deck, that's often enough to help you win the game. As a Modern Horizons card, it's only ever been legal in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. It's gained points in Sliver, Human, and Elemental decks in Modern, and it seems likely the Mariner will continue to slot into a variety of creature-type decks in the format. At number 4, it's Masked Vandal. For 1 generic and a green, this Changeling is a 1/3, and when it enters the battlefield, you can exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, it exiles an artifact or enchantment. It might take a bit of setup, but 2 mana for a 1/3 with all creature types that permanently removes an enchantment or artifact is a pretty amazing deal. It was such a good deal, in fact, that it saw standard play in decks that didn't even care about the Changeling part. However, the fact it has Changeling has mattered in other formats, like Legacy where it's played in Goblins, and Pauper where it's played in Sliver, Wall, and Elf decks. The Vandal is likely to continue to gain points, and it's going to pass the number 3 card on this list in the very near future. For now though, that number 3 card is Chameleon Colossus. It has the same overall score as the Vandal, but more first tier top 8, so I gave it the higher spot. For 2 generic and 2 green, this Changeling is a 4/4 with protection from black, and you can pay 2 generic and 2 green to give it +X/+X until end of turn, where X is its power. In other words, if you have 4 mana, it can threaten to be an 8/8, and if you have 8 mana, it can threaten to be a 16/16, and that's without any other boosts. It was played in block and standard in Treefolk, Elf, and Merfolk decks. The card would be solid even if it wasn't a Changeling, so getting additional value out of the Colossus's creature type makes it feel really good. It's also been played a fair bit in Modern, mostly as a sideboard card to bring in against black decks. In Modern, it's appeared in decks like Elves, Birthing Pod, Jund, Scapeshift, and Amulet Titan. It doesn't have any points since 2020 though, and for that reason, Masked Vandal is going to be passing it very soon. At number 2, it's Orvar, the All-Form. For 3 generic and a blue, this legendary Changeling is a 3/3, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets one or more other permanents you control, you create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. Additionally, if a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard it, you make a token that's a copy of target permanent. Orvar didn't see any play in Standard or Pioneer, but it's practically a staple in Modern sideboards, where it's useful against decks that look to cheat Archon of Cruelty into play in the early game. If you discard Orvar to the Archon's Enter the Battlefield ability, you get to copy the Archon and then attack the opponent with your Archon, usually eliminating theirs, at which point you can take over the game. Part of what has made Orvar so widespread in the format is how much of the metagame Archon decks are taking up. Obviously, Orvar can be brought in out of the sideboard by pretty much any deck. This has led to it amassing points rather quickly in the format. And that's slowed down a bit lately though, as modern decks have moved towards cheating other powerful creatures into play, partly as a result of Orvar. Still, it's very likely to pass the number 1 card on the list in the near future, and that card is Nameless Inversion. Like Crib Swap, this is an instant with the Kindred type. For 1 generic and a black, it gives +3/-3 to a creature, and it loses all creature types until end of turn. In most situations, it's much better than Crib Swap because it doesn't give your opponent anything in return, but it can't deal with any creature like Crib Swap can. Still, the fact it's far more efficient has led to it seeing way more play than Crib Swap ever has. It's an easily tutorable removal spell that can benefit from various other creature type payoffs, and that's just not something that there's a lot of in Magic, so it's seen a ton of play in block, standard, and extended, and in the more recent past it's been showing up in Pauper and even Vintage. Still, it's not gaining points as quickly as Orvar, and it's only got a 3-point lead, so I don't think it's going to hang on to this spot for very much longer. So, those are the top 10 Changelings. If you want to own any of these cards, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on the almost 700 other MTG top 10s, including many more that look at mechanics, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.